Made possible through support from ARC Thrift Stores, Autism Society of Colorado, Colorado Access, Colorado Developmental Disabilities Council, Developmental Pathways, Firefly Autism, Rocky Mountain Civitan Club, and the Arc of Aurora. A Think Change training. Hey there, everyone. Erica Dennison here, the Think Change and Programs Director with the Arc of Aurora, here today bringing you another episode as part of our multi-part series, Adulting 101 and Molding the Path to Adulthood. Today's episode is really going to be all about higher education and youth with developmental disabilities and kind of what that could look like for them after they're done with high school. So I'm joined by a special guest today who will be introducing herself to all of you. So please share with our viewers and listeners who you are, what you do, a little bit about yourself and the organization.
Yeah. So I'm Shayna Lang. I'm the Community Engagement Coordinator for IN, Pathways to Inclusive Higher Education. So IN is a nonprofit that supports inclusive higher education programs. So programs at colleges for students with intellectual and developmental disabilities to receive a meaningful credential and be prepared for a meaningful future, meaningful job when they graduate.
That's great.
Yeah, so my role in that community engagement field is really just to reach out to educators and parents and students and let them know that this is an option. Make sure that they're preparing their kiddos early on for higher education and knowing that it's an option even for students with IDD. So.
Which I think is so great because I think so oftentimes there's kind of this misconception, or you may not even really think about that higher education is most certainly an option for youth with developmental disabilities if that's something that they want to seek. So that's why I'm so happy that you're here today to kind of go over those frequently asked questions that a lot of our viewers and listeners may have.
Yeah, I'm excited.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So one of the questions that I have for you is, at what point should a youth or a family start to prepare for college applications, and should they discuss this with their high school teams?
Yeah, so I think there's multiple parts to that question. I think when you're considering applications, that can come down the line like junior year, senior year, but applications won't be meaningful if they're not planning in advance, like early on, to be prepared with the skills to actually apply for college, if that makes sense.
Yes.
So I speak to with lots of families, even in the elementary age, to say, hey, now is the time to start asking your kiddos with disabilities, what do you want to do in your future? Would that require further education? Let's start planning now. Let's start incorporating goals in your IEP now so that we're strategizing for higher education. So I think that conversation needs to start way earlier than it typically does. And a lot of youth in transition, they don't start those conversations until 14, which is kind of that like mandated time in a transition IEP. At age 14, they start seeing if post-secondary education is necessary. But we recommend students and families and educators considering that way earlier. But then when you kind of get into that zone and you're actually looking at post-secondary options, making sure you're not waiting until the last year before you graduate. So junior year is a great time to start reaching out, asking questions, meeting people on campus, participating in any mentorship programs, things like that. So you can really start to get a feel for what's going to be a good fit for you.
I think that's great. And I love the advice too of starting early, which I know it may truthfully be a little daunting because I mean, how many 14-year-olds, whether you have a disability or not, really know what the heck they want to do when they grow up? I mean, some of the most interesting 40-year-olds I know still don't know what they want to do when they grow up, right?
Absolutely.
So I think that's really great advice, is to, start early, consult with those teams, get that mentorship if you need it, and really figure out what needs to happen to help that student kind of follow their folly for adulthood.
Absolutely. And I think, so we use the terminology normative pathways. So like, what would be the normal process that you use for any kiddo that you're serving in K-12 when you're talking to them about what comes after high school? So normative pathway is at first grade. We're always asking kiddos what they want to be when they grow up. And it might be an astronaut, which is not applicable to most students, but they're able to dream and like desire those things. And so we want the same pathway for students with disabilities, that we can ask them to dream about that. And it's not providing false hope. I think a lot of times families and educators are concerned that that's a false hope kind of thing.
Sure.
And so, I mean, even speaking to Colorado, we didn't offer inclusive higher education programs for students with IDD until 2016. So it's new to the state of Colorado, new to families, new to educators. It's been around since 2008 across the nation. But even then, really our hope is how are we having those conversations early on like we would with any other student, allowing them to kind of fumble through their goals and desires and passions, and really working with the team to say, I really want to reach this goal no matter how many barriers I have to overcome to get there. Inclusive higher education allows them to really access that and to move through those barriers and actually pursue their goals and their dreams like any other student.
That's great. Thank
Yeah.
you. I'm happy your organization is around to help that happen.
Yeah,
Will a student see differences from what they were used to in high school versus higher education? For example, can the IEP and or 504 follow a child to higher education after high school? And if for some reason you are unfamiliar with what IEP stands for, that stands for Individualized Education Plan.
Yeah. So I'm going to speak to two pieces on this as well. So the typical college experience, so students that are not going through INS programs, which are for students with intellectual and developmental disabilities, but students that can reach college entry criteria for any university that they apply to, but they also have a disability. They kind of have a unique experience than the students that we serve. So I'll kind of speak to both of them.
Great.
So the traditional college experience, an IEP and a 504 do not directly come with a student. So a lot of times, my background is in disability services and higher ed. Students will maybe email out their 504 to their faculty or their IEP plan, and college faculty have no idea what those documents are. They're not trained in that. They're not required to be trained in that. So really what students have to do is be admitted to the university. So they have to,
Whoops.
they have to,
We had a technical error, but that's okay.
that's my fault.
All good.
There we go.
Moving right along. All good.
They have to meet that entry criteria into college. And then once they are admitted, they can disclose that they have a disability by going to the disability services office. So every institution by law has to have disability services on their campus. So once that student's admitted, they go there and they need to provide documentation of their disability to that staff person or personnel and start to discuss what appropriate accommodations are going to be at the higher education level. A lot of times accommodations are going to be similar, but the expectation at the higher education level is that they cannot alter essential functions of each course. So that's fancy jargon to essentially say every student has to meet the same expectations in order to get that same weighted diploma or degree. So students can't alter any expectations of the course, but they can alter the way in which they meet those expectations.
Got it.
And we can chat through what accommodations look like, but the IEP and the 504 can be a good guidance for students when they meet with disability services, but it's not set in stone and it's not mandated for them. So they have to present what their disability is, communicate, self-advocate, discuss, have a very interactive process, and then that disability services office will determine here's the appropriate accommodations at this institution that they will give you. And a huge shift is that doesn't just get disseminated to your faculty or to your teachers. The student then is responsible for self-advocating to the professors themselves with that formal documentation at the institution.
Got it.
So it can feel like a really big shift of responsibility, and it is.
Absolutely.
But the reason why it's so valuable and why it's a worthwhile transition and a worthwhile shift of responsibility is because we really want to prepare students for what happens after college when they get into a job and they have a need or a barrier that their disability is presenting and they're going to need support and accommodations. Their employer is not going to know to offer that off the bat. They're going to have to communicate clearly. They're going to have to self-advocate and have confidence in the accommodations that they would require to be able to meet those expectations of the job. So to speak. So that's kind of that traditional process with inclusive higher ed. So with our students with IDD who are coming primarily from pull-out resource rooms, special education classrooms, these are students that have received modifications for most of their K-12 experience. So those are changes to the expectations of a course where instead of a student completing a 5-page paper like the rest of their peers, maybe they're doing an organizational chart to show what they're learning, right? Those kinds of things. So those are the types of students that typically don't meet the entry criteria for college, and that's why they would require programs like ours. In that pool, once they apply to inclusive higher education programs, it's still very similar where they have to show documentation. They'll present their IEP and their 504 to the team, and they'll meet together to determine what's best, but they are able to access modifications when they are attending an inclusive higher education program because they're not receiving a degree. Instead, they're receiving a certificate, still accredited by the institution. But that's a really big shift that we've seen for students that really feel like they require modifications to access the college classroom. should be going through that route with inclusive higher education. Students that don't require modifications and can meet those expectations of every single course should go through that traditional college route where they're accessing the Disability Services Office. And still all along those pathways is navigating what are the accommodations and modifications right for them, self-advocacy and ownership.
Yeah. But I think closing up that question that I asked is, making sure that you do have self-advocacy skills, no matter who you are, where you come from. You know what your needs are, and it's okay to ask for those modifications if you need them.
Absolutely.
Even though, these plans that you had in high school may not follow you, I think it's really important that you shared with them that it's okay to speak up, it's okay to use your voice, and it's okay to ask for, those modifications if you need them.
Absolutely.
Great.
Yeah.
So what would you say to this question? Does someone need to inform their post-secondary school that they have a disability? You talked about this a little bit already.
Yeah. So in short, yes.
Yes.
I think, every student has the right to disclose that if they want to or they don't. So at a traditional college experience, you can be admitted to the college and continue on your way without those supports. I've seen a lot of students try that. And they tend to fumble through their first couple of semesters because they're trying to white knuckle it through college. And I have often sat with them and encouraged them that it's brave and wise to sit down in a disability services office and say, this is the barrier that I'm facing in my academics, and I want to be able to be as successful as possible. So let's talk through what's going to be a good fit. So that disclosing or sharing of your disability with a professional is going to be huge because it sets them up for success rather than feeling like you're really struggling through your academics. And that's wonderful when you can kind of have the headspace, where you're not focusing on all the barriers your disability might be presenting, but you feel confident about the accommodations in place. But you can be in a headspace where you're giving your best effort to your classes and you're really engaging deeply with your academics and campus life, all of those pieces. So short answer is yes, please do. Please communicate with the staff on campus because they're really there to support you.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And then the next question I have that kind of aligns with that is, can, a college or university deny someone admission because they have a disability? That may sound like a wild question for me to ask, but I think it's an important one to ask.
Absolutely. Yeah. They cannot legally. The distinction here, though, is that students have to meet the entry criteria to that university. So if they don't meet the entry criteria, disability or not, you can be denied because that's the same expectation for all students. But if you do meet that entry criteria, you cannot be discriminated against based on your disability. They are required by law to offer you accommodations to give you access to the full college experience. And that's really important to know that it's based on access and not guaranteeing success. So that's a pretty big shift from high school to college. You'll hear lots of disability service offices share that the accommodations in place are there to provide access, but the students are really responsible for being successful. But they can't deny you based on a disability if you meet that entry criteria.
Great. And then with the entry criteria, that could be an array of things. I'm assuming based on GPA or, depending on where you are, SAT scores or things like that, correct?
Yep. So typically you're looking at a traditional high school diploma, which some students from special education do not receive that. ACT and SAT scores and specific rates, and then GPA. So that's that traditional college entry criteria. Different by each institution in terms of numbers, but that's kind of generally what you're looking at. So when you're considering students in your life, if those are not things that you can meet, doesn't mean that college is off the table. That means then you need to route towards inclusive higher education, where it's a alternative entry criteria. You're approved by the program itself and then enrolled in the institution through that.
Wonderful advice. Thank you so much for clarifying that. I think what's very important is that we talk about ADA accommodations. ADA stands for the Americans with Disabilities Act. Can a student with a disability request ADA accommodations to make their college experience work better for them? You talked about modifications. Can you talk a little bit about that? Or maybe some examples of maybe what an accommodation could be?
Yeah, absolutely.
Great.
So yes, students should be able to ask for accommodations to make the content of their college experience more accessible to them. Common accommodations, as I mentioned before, can't alter course essential functions or can't lessen the expectations of a course. So typically you're looking at Extended time for exams is really common. Taking exams in a quiet room or a separate testing location. Lots of assistive technology. So technology like reading text aloud. If dyslexia is something that's really tricky, it can read it aloud too, so you can kind of track with the questions better. Or speech to text, where if, typing or something is tricky, you can dictate components. So there's accommodations that essentially when I speak of accommodations, I'm saying changing the way in which you're meeting the same outcomes as the rest of your peers. So every other peer in that college class is going to be taking that, 50 question exam, and you'll take that same 50 question exam just with 50% more time, so that you're not caught up in all the barriers that maybe your disability presents. And so based on each institution, you can request specific accommodations and see if they have the means to provide that. And if they don't, they can strategize what's going to be necessary. If your disability is presenting a barrier to you accessing the college content, then they're required to navigate how to eliminate that barrier so that you have equal access. So that's the accommodation level. And at the traditional college experience, you cannot receive any modifications. So any attempt at a lessened load, or like 10 questions instead of 20 questions, that would not be approved, because that changes the expectation of the course for that one individual.
Does
that make sense?
That absolutely makes sense. So it's basically living the same college experience as anyone else would, but just giving you those alternative modifications so that you are able to participate in college or university life just like anyone else would, just in a little different way.
Yeah. And so that's that traditional route. And then when you're looking at students who would require modifications to go to college and would go through that inclusive higher education pathway that IN offers, the way that works is students are still included in the college classes you're attending as any other college student, but the program staff work with the faculty to actually provide modifications to the content. So they could receive a 10 question quiz instead of 20 based on what their academic level is. And so that's very individualized. It's a little bit more parallel to that special education IEP process when you go through an inclusive higher education program. So I think that's really big for me when I'm meeting with families and talking with students, that delineation. If you really require that modification, that traditional college route won't be the fit for you, but inclusive higher education could provide you modifications, still requiring like high academic rigor and challenge, because we believe students with IDD, wider range of disabilities, can do really hard things. They just need support along the way. So
for sure. And I really appreciate you kind of breaking out kind of the differences, because I think it really can be kind of daunting and confusing. As I think most people think of just like the traditional college or university setting, but knowing that they have lots of options and choices to kind of figuring out what best fits their needs is a really great option. So those are all the questions that I had for you today. Do you have anything else to add that you want to share with maybe our viewers and listeners before we kind of close up our conversation?
Yeah. I think I'll just speak to the schools that offer inclusive higher education for students with IDD are limited. So it's not required by state to be at institutions. So we have 3 schools in the state of Colorado right now. So ACC, our Arapahoe Community College, the one in Littleton, so our community college area. And then we have 2 universities, UNC, and their program is GOAL, and UCCS in Colorado Springs, and their program is the Office of Inclusive Services. So those are the 3 current programs offered to support and provide inclusive higher education experiences, fully included, living on campus for students with IDD. So if that's the bucket that you fall into, I just encourage you to check it out. But I always love talking with any family and just kind of helping them point them in the right direction of which higher education pathway is going to be good for them. So I'm always available.
That's great.
That's great.
So we have 3. So we have the community college option, and then we have 2 university options. You said UNC, which is University of Northern Colorado.
Greeley.
And then UCCS, which, correct me if I'm wrong, is the University of Colorado Springs.
Nailed it. Yep.
Oh, those acronyms are really tricky. Well, that's great to know that people have options and alternatives. And if for some reason you're tuning us into this and maybe you don't live within Colorado, I certainly encourage you to explore what programs may be available to you outside of, our state of Colorado, because it really sounds like there are alternatives really everywhere. It may not be every single place, but they sound like they're really expanding a lot more, and there is more options for students with developmental disabilities now.
And a great place to look is thinkcollege.net. So Think College is the national hub for inclusive higher education programs. So for students that don't meet that college entry criteria,
Perfect.
but still desire, ongoing training in a specific skill so that they can have more meaningful employment. So yeah, thinkcollege.net is a great place to start.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you for that.
Yes.
Well, thank you so much for joining me today. I super appreciate your valuable time and sharing, with our viewers and listeners kind of what higher education could look like for students with developmental disabilities. So thank you for joining me. And to all of our viewers and listeners, we really appreciate you tuning in. And until next time, stay curious and we'll see you soon. Bye.